Hello and welcome to the first in a series of videos looking at the different units for Total War Warhammer's races. So we're going to start off by looking at the lords and heroes for the Empire. So let's jump straight into this, and your first option as we go across the list is just a straight up General of the Empire. So this is a combat general, and you get some choices with him. So you've got mounts, you've got nothing if you want to have him on foot, warhorse, barded warhorse, Imperial Pegasus, and Imperial Griffin. Now each of these provide slightly different bonuses. So warhorse more or less just adds speed, some charge bonus, and a little bit of extra health, as you can see over on the right hand side. Barded warhorse, a little bit slower than your normal warhorse, but does add armor and a little bit more health. Imperial Pegasus, quite a decent boost to both speed and charge bonus, as well as an even bigger boost to health, and now you can fly. And your Imperial Griffin, as you can see, you actually get a slight drop in melee attack and defense, but a massive boost to your health, charge bonus, and speed. While obviously slower than Imperial Griffin is still good, and again you're flying. You're also now got armor piercing, which you'll see is removed, and you now also cause terror. So if we just come down the bottom here and have a look at the symbols, these all mean something. Right, so you get missile resistance with him, but once we've got him mounted, we will also get causes fear and causes terror. So just a quick look at these here, because they are important to note. Causing fear reduces the leadership of enemies when it's nearby. As it says there, you can't stack them, so as long as you only need one unit to cause fear to be within range. Terror is different, so this can actually make them rout. So you can actually terror rout them. So the two in combo are obviously really good, and generally speaking, you don't get terror without also fear. So you'll get the fear, which drops their leadership, and then terror, which will potentially cause them to run, especially if they got lower leadership. Right, he's also got an encourage aura, so you're going to find this on all your lords and heroes, as well as some units. And this just buffs the leadership of other troops within a radius around them. Right, so we'll go through some of these others here in a second in a bit more detail, as they're part of this lot. So we're just going to take him back to having no mount at the moment and go through his base stats. So he is armored and shielded, so the color of the shield also determines how much. So as you see here, this unit has a shield and will block 35% of all small arms missile fire hitting it from the front. So it does have to be from the front, so people can get to the side or rear of you, or if you're facing a shielded opponent, you can get to their side or rear. They no longer have that shield. Now that, along with the missile resistance of 15%, does mean that these guys can actually take a fair bit of damage. Now 85 armor, this is good. Higher armor, less damage. Pretty simple. Leadership, again, higher the better. Fairly simple. Speed, well, generally speaking, yes, being fast is good, especially for your lords and heroes. So when he's on foot, not particularly fast. The fastest he can get to is on the Imperial Pegasus at 105. And then we've got the 80, 66, and 90. So melee attack. This is actually your chance to hit someone. So again, higher the better. And it is played off against the melee defense. So again, higher, better. It's a behind the scenes thing that, to tell you the truth, I've never seen the algorithm fully explained, so I'm not going to try. Essentially though, higher melee attack, higher melee defense, good. Weapon strength. So this is always broken down between weapon damage and armor piercing damage. So it'll appear as a combined number here, but if you just hover over the actual bar, you'll get the breakdown. And as you can see, he does 150 armor piercing damage. So this means that 150 damage from him will ignore all armor, and then the other 300 has a chance to be blocked by armor. Now, if you'll note, when we got the Imperial Griffin, it actually became armor piercing. So you'll note the number doesn't actually change, because what we now get is we actually get a switch in those numbers. So now 290 damage of armor piercing and 160 normal weapon damage. So this is something to note. So in this form, don't get me wrong, he's still going to do a decent whack of damage. Most of your lords and heroes are in general, as well as some of the larger units against armor. But with the other one, he's just going to shred armor units very well. Charge bonus, exactly what it sounds like there. As it says in the tooltip, it increases the melee attack and damage when charging. Now this is not actually necessarily all delivered instantaneously. So it is actually worth charging and leaving them sitting there for a few seconds. You know, we're not talking a large number. 5 to 10 seconds in general is more than enough time. And during that time, the entire charge bonus will be drained, and you'll actually see usually the enemy's leadership and health drop far more rapidly during this period, and then you'll sort of see it slow down. That's when you pull them out, because that's when the charge bonus has been expended. So on top of the mounts, he does have some abilities. So we've got Hold the Line. So as it says there, it has a 40 meter effect range around him, plus full leadership and 100% charge resistance, and it's constant. So it's not an activated ability, it's just a passive one. Full leadership, pretty decent, depending on the troops you got around. Certainly with your lower level troops, 4 is actually a pretty decent buff. On your higher level troops, well, more leadership's never a bad thing to have in general. The 100% charge resistance is what's really good here though. So essentially by having 100% charge resistance, whatever unit you've got within inside this aura, this charge bonus no longer works against them. Right, Foe Seeker. So this one is activated and only affects him. It increases his speed by 24% and his vigor by 18%. So the vigor here is probably more important than the speed, as generally you're going to have them mounted and they're going to be relatively quick. In saying that, depending on what you're doing with them, you might be trying to chase down another lord on a flying unit themselves, and they can also move quick, so that extra speed boost could be useful. But by being able to alter the vigor and get them, keeping them at high levels of vigor for longer, they'll be more effective in combat, as your vigor drops, you do lose combat efficiency. Deadly Onslaught, so pretty long duration, which is good. Obviously the charge bonus is going to be used up well before that duration is up. Obviously good to use in combo. You get that speed boost to get them there quicker, and then hit that Deadly Onslaught to get in there. But that 18% armor piercing damage, really good when you're throwing them against armored troops. And then Stand Your Ground. So again, activated. This one is another aura, 40 meters again, only 15-second duration, but that is quite a large increase to both leadership and melee defense. So it's really for helping your troops stand their ground, as the name would suggest. Okay, so that's your basic combat general of the Empire. So next on the list here we have Balthasar Gelt. So he's one of the legendary lords. So legendary lords are a little bit different. They usually have slightly better stats than their non-legendary counterparts. So, as you would expect from a caster hero, not particularly high health or armor, decent leadership. At the moment he's on foot, so his speed is what you'd expect. Melee attack and melee defense, very average, but again, he's not really designed to be getting in there. So again, weapon strength, also low. Charge bonus, 30. Pretty decent for an on-foot unit. But again, you just expect the numbers to be a little bit bigger on your legendary lords. So he only has one mount option, that's an Imperial Pegasus. Generally speaking, for casters in general, having them mounted and having them mounted on flying creatures is very useful, as it not only increases their speed, which allows you to keep them out of harm's way better, it does give them more freedom to get to where they need to be to cast their spells, which we'll get into in a second. Right, so his abilities, so he uses the Law of Metal, so he gets metal shifting. Each law has a passive that it comes with. So as it says there, map wide, 4% armor piercing damage. That's every single troop you have will have an extra 4% to their armor piercing damage. Right, he also gets hold the line. We've already been through that, and stand the ground, so we'll skip over those. Arcane Conduit, standard for your casters. So it's activated for 40 seconds. You get that increase to power reserves and the power recharge rate. Right, so what spells does he have access to? So we have Searing Doom. So this is a bombardment spell. So generally speaking, you want to try and hit stationary targets or targets that you feel your enemy is not particularly looking at the time. Now with the AI, if you're doing campaign or just versing the AI in custom battles, a little bit more difficult, as obviously theoretically the AI can be looking everywhere at once and move their enemies out of the way. But if they're locked in combat, that generally won't happen. Yeah, 200 meter range and 5 Winds of Magic cost with a 23-second cooldown, and yeah, it'll just do damage. Just for instance, some of these spells can be overcast. I'm not going to go into that in this video. If you want to see what spells can be overcast, just right click on one of them. We'll bring up the whole browser. You can go through and have a look at both the overcast effect and cost. So Plague of Rust is a hex, lasts for 44 seconds, so it's got quite a decent duration, especially as it has a 22-second cooldown, and it only costs that 4 Winds of Magic. So minus 30 armor. So this is particularly good if you don't have a lot of armor-piercing troops on the battlefield, and you need to lower the armor of the enemy to allow more of your damage to get through, especially if you're facing high armored troops. Right. Gehenna's Golden Hounds. So this counts as a vortex. It's a relatively cheap vortex at only 9 Winds of Magic, 45-second cooldown, 13-second duration, so pretty decent. So the biggest problem with this is that once cast, the movement of it is random. So it may spill over into your own troops. It may not particularly stay on the enemy troops for long unless you're hitting a really densely packed formation. Vortexes just in general aren't necessarily that good, or at least the moving ones aren't. Don't get me wrong, this is actually in line with how they work on the tabletop, with them moving randomly after being cast, but yeah. Glittering Robe, a little bit more useful here. Generally speaking, you're going to find the augments and hexes for Law of Metal are your better options to go. So 7 Winds Magic, 42-second cooldown, 40-second duration, so pretty even on that fact. 30 extra armor and 8 leadership, both of which are good boosts. 30 armor on troops to buff up their armor, take less damage, especially if they're facing non-armor piercing enemies. It's really going to help them out. And 8 leadership, as always, all leadership is better. Right, final transmutation. So yeah, expensive, long cooldown for a direct damage area spell. So this is going to affect all enemies within that 30 meters, and it is going to do a relatively decent amount of damage. Transmutation of Lead, very useful. Obviously, as you can see, also quite expensive, but again, you get that area of effect, you get a decent duration out of it, and 22% less weapon damage and negative 34 to their melee attack. You are pretty much stopping the enemy from doing any real damage for that 30 seconds. So very useful for keeping your units alive. And obviously if you combine this with something like Glittering Robe, which ups your armor, or Plague of Rust that drops their armor, so they're now doing less damage and taking more damage, you can really tip the scales of a fight in your favor. So moving along, we've got Boris Todbringer, the Elector Count of Middenland. So with some of the lords and heroes, you're going to see stuff like this, melee expert. So generally speaking, it's just about their stats. So they generally got much better melee stats if they're a melee expert, and you really want to be throwing them into the thick of combat where it's safe to do so. they're going to just tear units apart. Right, so armor, quite decent. He has a silver shield, which gives him a 55% block chance on small arms fire coming from the front, so quite decent. High leadership. While he's on foot, we'll go through his mounts in a second. Normal sort of speed. 60 melee attacks, so this is really good, and high melee defense to boot. Weapon strength, 450, as you can see, pretty much the same as that general, just a little bit higher in these stats, and he's got that nice 45 charge bonus. So, he has a Barded Warhorse, an Imperial Pegasus, and an Imperial Griffin as his options, each with their usual bonuses. Right, so in terms of abilities, he's got Hold the Line, he's got Foe Seeker, he's got Deadly Onslaught, he's got Stand Your Ground, and he has Crush the Weak. So this is one that's unique to him as a legendary lord. As you can see, it's a constant one around him, and it has a 40 meter effect range. So essentially, if the unit leadership is higher than 50%, sorry, if his leadership is higher than 50%, I believe. It's one of the two, I can't remember, sorry. But essentially the effects are there. Well, they're not the biggest numbers, but it is still helpful. Right, and items. He gets a lovely item here in the form of the Middenland Rune Fang, which essentially gives him regen, which is awesome. That's just constant. Now, each unit does have a regen cap, which unfortunately won't show up until you're in battle. But once it does, you'll see like a little teardrop, or blood drop, I suppose, because it's red with like a little white cross in it. Hover over that and it'll tell you how much health they can regen, and it'll also have how much they have regen, so how much they've got left. So you can keep track of that in battle. Now, Balthasar Gelt, we didn't go over his item. He gets the Staff of Volanus. Essentially, this just really helps with the power recharge and the power reserves. It is activated, so 24 seconds, quite useful. Right, Karl Franz, the Emperor of Man. So you'll see as he comes with armor piercing by himself. Now you'll see he has the duelist as opposed to melee expert. So it's what these guys are good at is taking out other enemy lords and heroes. So someone like Boris Todbringer, if you try and send him after a lord or hero, and that lord or hero's mixed in with a bunch of other troops, all the damage is just going to be spread out amongst the other troops as well as the lord and hero, but it's all going to be even. So the lord and hero realistically probably not taking that much damage considering their overall health pool on a single unit. Whereas Karl Franz here, in that same situation, and you've told him specifically to attack that hero or lord, he's going to put all his damage into that hero or lord, which allows him to just take them out in combat very quickly. So, as for his other stats, you'll notice he isn't shielded but does have quite significant armor, high leadership, again he's on foot, we'll go through his options in a second. High melee attack, a little bit lower melee defense than Boris Todbringer, so he's not quite as good at resisting the damage, but that's quite a high melee attack. So he is going to be putting out the damage quite well. 450, and because he comes with armor piercing to start with, 290 of that is armor piercing, so good, and a fairly high charge. Now we have a new symbol down here, and that is immune to psychology, and pretty much what it says there on the box. Fear and terror don't work on these units, so quite useful. So as for his mount options, Warhorse, Barded Warhorse, Imperial Pegasus. Now he has his own Griffin, which is Deathclaw. So you'll see it actually drops his melee attack to 45, which is a pretty decent hit, but it does really buff both his charge bonus, health, and speed significantly. And he now causes fear and terror. So as for abilities, nothing new here. Hold the Line, Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, and Stand Your Ground. As for items, he gets a choice. He can either have the Reichland Rune Fang, which really helps increase his damage that he's doing in a wider area by increasing his splash attack, as well as armor piercing and weapon damage in general. Or give him Gal Maraz, which just straight up gives him quite a significant boost to armor piercing damage. So it's all about how you plan on using him in the fight. Right, now we've got our normal Arch Lector. So this is more of a support based Lord. So, yep, armored. So as you can see here, 95, 75 leadership, speed a little bit lower than what you've seen on the other Lords, but is actually a little bit more heavily armored except for Karl, but Karl's legendary, so he gets slightly better stats. Melee attack not particularly high, but quite significant melee defense. A little bit lower weapon strength because he's not designed for combat as per se. A little bit more than a straight up caster hero, but still not meant to be getting in there like a actual combat hero. So you want to keep them well protected and pull them out if things are looking a bit dicey. And this also means he gets a slightly lower charge bonus. So now he's got the missile resistance, but he also gets magic resistance as well. So can be quite useful there. Now as for his mount options, he comes with a warhorse and barded warhorse option only. Abilities, right, so this is where the Arch Lector really shines. So benediction, so 30 meter radius plus 8 leadership. Now that's just constant. Divine power, so this is a hex. So again, it's constant around them, 55 meter radius with a plus 50% miscast chance. So if you can get him close or within 55 meters essentially of enemy casters and they're trying to overcast things, they really have a much higher chance of taking damage from that overcasting. Faith's Bastion. So this is an activated ability and it only affects him, but it is 22% damage resistance. So that's fairly significant and it really helps his survivability. Grand Hammer of Sigma. So 40 meter radius around him, 36 seconds, so quite decent. You'll notice it says added effect area a different color, and this is because this particular one, when we go to the warrior priest, you'll notice doesn't have that area of effect. So when we get there, you're going to notice a couple of things that are the same, but maybe missing that area of effect. So it's counted as a battle prayer, so it's not actually magic, and it just gives plus 34 melee attack. So this helps offset both his relatively average, low to average melee attack by buffing it quite significantly, but it also buffs everything around him, really allowing for more attacks to get through. And then to help out on the other side, we have Grand Shield of Faith. So this now gives 22% damage resistance to everything. Not just him, but everything within that 55 meter radius. And Grand Soulfire, so this is just a straight up bombardment, but it's a little bit different than the ones you're going to see out of most of the magic spells, as this is just straight up 20 meter radius around the character, and yeah, it just causes magical damage inside of there. Also buffs your troops with a 90% magic resistance. Right, items can have the Mace of Hellstrom. So as you can see there, it on an activation, 29 seconds, fire damage, as well as that 18% armor piercing and 22% weapon damage. So fire damage is good against most things with regen, as they tend to be weak versus fire, as well as your wood units from the Wood Elf roster. Right, last of our lords is Volkmar the Grim. So this is our legendary lord version of our Arch Lector. So you will notice a few differences with him straight away though. For instance, he has much lower armor, higher leadership, a little bit higher speed, and his melee attacks come with fire and magic to start with, so that's what these symbols are. So he gets both flaming attacks and magical attacks. Quite a decent melee attack as well. Melee defense though is actually fairly average. Weapon strength, yep, fairly decent really. Charge bonus is a little on the low side, but he is on foot at the moment. So other than that, it's pretty much all the same there. I don't think we have anything special here. He's pretty much the same as what you got on the Arch Lector, but he does have mounts. So he gets the Warhorse and Barded Warhorse, but he also gets the War Altar of Sigmar. So this is unique to him and provides several bonuses. So you put him on this and he now causes fear and terror, as well as becoming unbreakable. So this is a newer one down here that we will see pop up a little bit. And as it says there, they're just never going to run. So it is quite useful. Also, he does now become a large target. So that's something to keep in mind. Anti-large weapons will do better against him. He does obviously, though, also push through enemies a lot better. It's essentially a chariot. Hence why he changes from hammer infantry to magic chariot. You'll notice that happens when you click on the different mounts in general. So abilities, again, nothing different from our Arch Lector. Items, he does get the Jade Griffin, which does give him regen. So working the same as the Rune Fang on Boris. Right, so let's jump into our hero. So we have the Witch Hunter. So the Witch Hunter, as it said, is actually a missile specialist. So there's not actually a lot of these around in terms of our heroes. You will see a couple pop up, but generally speaking, they're not particularly common. So he gets armor-piercing missiles, and he is a duelist. So if he does get into combat, he's really good at taking out enemy lords and heroes. So he is squishy, though. Not particularly high health, as per se. Low armor. Pretty average leadership, really, for a hero. Speed, yeah, fairly typical for a foot unit. Melee attack and melee defense are quite average. Weapon strength, that's melee weapon strength, as you can see there. Not bad as per se. Not a lot of armor piercing though. Charge bonus, for a foot unit that's decent, but obviously not as much as you can get with some of your cav. Ammo, that's actually quite a large amount of ammo. 60 is quite high, even though it doesn't seem to fill up that bar a lot. Once we see some of our missile units in later videos, you're going to see that 60 is actually quite a lot. Range is 90 though, so he doesn't have a particularly long range, but 362 missile damage with 104 of that being armor piercing. That is good. So this is what you want to be doing with him. You want to be sitting back and you want to be pumping arrows either into large targets or units with small numbers of models, or enemy heroes and lords. That's sort of his primary use if you're going to be bringing a Witch Hunter. Now, saying that, generally speaking in campaign, I keep my Witch Hunters out of armies. One, because there are better options, and two, I tend to prefer to have them running around as actual agents. Right, so no mounts for the Witch Hunter. He's a completely foot unit. As for abilities, slippery, so sort of really helps more keep him out of the action, or get him in, I suppose, if you really want, with that 24% speed and acceleration bonus. And then accusation, so this 75 meters, yeah, he's got to be relatively close, but you probably want him about that close anyhow. Really good at doing damage to single targets, as it says there, or if you are going to go against actual units, try and pick ones with low model counts. Items, so he gets access to a couple of potions. So potion of full hardiness, which increases his charge bonus, also makes him immune to psychology and unbreakable for its duration. Potion of speed, does all the speed related stuff. Speed, acceleration, charge, speed, and vigor. And potion of strength. So this will increase his capability of doing damage in melee. So all potions are a one-use item throughout the battle. Right, our next hero is our Empire Captain. So he's a melee specialist. So he's going to really get in there and do some work. So armored and shielded. Yep, bronze shield. 85 armor, so decent. 65 leadership, it's not too bad. 35 speed, well he's on foot at the moment. 50 melee attack and 40 melee defense though, so that's quite decent. 35 weapon strength, 125 of which is armor piercing, so good there. Charge bonus of 40, decent considering he's on foot at the moment. Right, as for his mount options, Warhorse, Barded Warhorse, and Imperial Pegasus. Abilities, stuff we've seen before, Hold the Line, Foe Seeker, and Deadly Onslaught. As for items, he also has access to Potion of Foolhardiness, Potion of Speed, and Potion of Strength. Right, next hero, the Warrior Priest. This is essentially a toned down version of the Arch Lector. So, relatively low armor, but at least he has some. Leadership is 70, so as you can see, he's actually got some of the best leadership we have going around in our heroes. Pretty standard speed. Melee attack, quite decent. Average melee defense though. Weapon strength though is actually quite high, so he can actually do some work in there for you with a 30 charge bonus. Now he also gets the option of a Warhorse or Barded Warhorse as his mount. Abilities, so these are all things that we saw on the Arch Lector, but you will notice that a couple of them are missing their area of effect. So yeah, just something to keep in mind with the Warrior Priest. His only real area of effect spells are Soulfire and Shield of Faith. Everything else only affects him, which can be helpful. It still makes him kick ass, but he doesn't help troops around him as much as the actual Arch Lector. Right, so Empire has one of the largest rosters of wizards as it has access to the major laws. So we start with Grey. So all their stats through here are pretty much going to be the same for all of them. Relatively low armor, pretty average leadership, the sort of speed you expect from a foot unit, who, especially a non-combat one. Low melee attack and melee defense because again they're not really meant to be getting in there. Still they're heroes, so they get decent weapon strength but low armor piercing and a low charge bonus. Now you can mount them on a Warhorse, a Barded Warhorse, or an Imperial Pegasus, and I'll just restate, as I said with Balthasar Gelt, flying casters are just good. Very good to have. If you can afford it, I'd always try and have them flying around. Now, abilities. Yep, they're all going to have Arcane Conduit, which we've already been through. But as I was saying with Balthasar, each Law of Magic does have its own passive. And in the case of Grey Wizards, that would be a map-wide 6% speed boost for all your units. It is quite good. That 6% speed is actually quite good, I have to say. It is one of the more useful passives going around these things. Now, as for spells, we have Melkoth Mystifying Miasma, 5 winds of magic, 23 second cooldown, 11 second duration. So this does damage as well as lowers the speed of enemy. This can be quite useful, especially if you have units that aren't too dissimilar in speed and you really want to slow one down and kite it, say. This can be quite useful. Also, it just does damage, so it's not bad to throw out there. Enfeebling Foe, so this lowers both melee attack and melee defense by quite a significant amount, so it is good, especially for only 6 winds of magic. 24 second duration, 24 second cooldown, also good. Right, the Penumbral Pendulum. So this is all wind, so this is a new type of spell we haven't seen before. So these have, essentially you'll see a template on the ground showing the direction in which they are going to travel and the rough area of effect that they will have. Now, I have to say, Penumbral Pendulum is probably one of the best looking spells in general, I would say, because you actually get to see a giant razor sharp pendulum swing across the battlefield through your enemy. It looks awesome, I just have to say. Always enjoy watching it go off. You really want to try and get to the side of the enemy with this and have it go through their ranks that way. It is really good. Right, the Withering, so lowers armor and leadership. Just useful, really. Overall, for 7 Winds of Magic, not too bad. Right, Occam's Mind Razor, so this is its buff. So we get 44% weapon damage and 36% armor piercing damage. This is quite high and realistically well worth the 10 Winds of Magic. Right, and then we get Pit of Shades. So this is the Vortex. Now this Vortex is actually quite useful. It doesn't move. So it's probably closer to a bombardment spell in that sense. It's just going to stay in the spot that you told it could. So again, good to hit enemies that aren't likely to move. This also actually looks very cool. Actually, I think overall the Grey Wizards get some of the cooler looking spells between this and the Pendulum. So yeah, quite useful and just fun to watch. Okay, so Amber Wizards up next. Right, so Amber Wizards do get an extra choice in mounts as they can be on Imperial Griffins. They are the only ones who get this choice. So again, Arcane Conduit. Now their passive is Wild Heart, so this is an increase to power reserves. Fairly useful. As for their spells, so we get Waisan's Wild Form, so 22% weapon damage and plus 30 armor for only 4 Winds of Magic. That is just a absolutely awesome boost to the combat power of a unit. Flock of Doom. So 6 Winds of Magic for a 30 meter effect radius that causes damage to opponents. Very useful. And if you're facing undead and you expect them to bring a lot of ethereal units, things like Khan and Hexwraith, this thing's just going to do work for you against those sorts of units very well. Right, the Amber Spear. So these magic missiles, at one point I would have said they were good, but in more recent times, to tell you the truth, I've found that they miss more than they hit. Now don't get me wrong, when they hit, they can actually do quite a significant amount of damage to a single target. This one in particular has armor piercing, so it can be quite good at taking out armored units, but yeah, like I said, I've just found that they tend to be more miss than hit than they originally were. Right, Pan's Impenetrable Pelt. So good against AP damage like it says there, because it ups that physical resistance. So even if they've got AP damage coming through and ignoring your armor, they're still going to be doing 22% less actual damage. The speed, yeah, well, it's got a decent duration, but realistically the main part of this spell is that physical resistance. Right, the Curse of Anrahia. So this is quite good. 24% speed and 60% accuracy. Now, don't be wrong, when I say good, they're quite large amounts to have effective, especially for 60 seconds in a 40 meter radius. The problem is they're very, very situational. So, Wood Elves. I'm just going to put it out there. Pretty much this is really good against Wood Elves. It stops them from kiting and doing a lot of damage with like half their roster. But that probably shouldn't be surprising, as this is actually the Law of Beasts. So its primary user is Beastmen, which are the primary bad guys as per se for the Wood Elves. So it's kind of very geared around that fight. Unfortunately, that just means it's not particularly useful outside of that, but anyhow. And Transformation of Kadon. So you get 2 users per battle. Yes, it is a high cost in Winds of Magic with a 51-second cooldown, but hey, you get a Manticore out of it, so you can't overly complain. Now, it does have a limited amount of time that it'll stick around for, as all summoned units like this do just degrade over time. Now, items, I didn't go through this with the other wizard, but they all get the same one. Scroll of Leeching. So if you can hit another enemy wizard, you get that greatly reduced power recharge rate for 67 seconds. Trust me, this can be quite devastating to their ability to actually cast spells. Scroll of Shielding, quite a decent duration there, and 22% damage resistance is just straight up useful. Scroll of Power, so 90-second ability recharge, so negative 90 seconds to the ability recharge. This is really about if you just really need to get the cooldowns off of something. So you really want to hit something, it's got a much longer cooldown than its duration. So you let its duration go, you hit them with the Scroll of Power, and hopefully can more or less go straight into using them again, or something a lot quicker. Yeah, up to you as to whether you feel it's worth bringing. Right, Jade Wizard. So our Jade Wizard, all the usual mounts. Its passive is when you're casting, you will replenish the hit points of combatants map wide. So you want to be trying to cast as often as possible with this particular wizard. So the spells. We get Awakening of the Wood. So this is a nice AoE explosion. That also has a 48% speed debuff. Now, the only problem with this is most of these explosions, you're going to be using them on stationary targets anyhow, preferably ones that are locked in combat, so that speed debuff, not particularly useful, but yeah. Earthblood, so this is your AoE heal for this lore, and yeah, it heals. Not much can be said about that. Now, it will not bring units back from the dead, so if you've lost actual models, they won't come back, but any ones that are still remaining will get their health replenished. So this spell is particularly useful against low model count, high health per model units, but there is a slightly better one for individual units, which we'll get to in a second. Flesh to Stone, 60 armor. I mean, that's a lot of extra armor. I mean, not much needs to be said about that. We've gone through what armor does for you. Shield of Thorns, so we get that 22% weapon damage as well as 22% missile resistance. So yeah, bit of a weird offset there, as it's upping your weapon damage while also increasing your missile resistance. You're not going to be getting shot at too often when you're in combat, but is something to keep in mind. Right, Regrowth. So this is the one that's particularly good for a single target. Now, don't get me wrong, by all means, go and use Earthblood. It's certainly cheaper at 9 to cast and does have that AoE. But if you're looking to hit just one unit, this is your better option, because it also gives them that 22% physical resistance. So they're going to be taking less damage while healing. So this really helps get either single targets or the likes of your Demigryph Knights, Knights in general, really, back up to speed very quickly. Right, and the Dwellers Below, so this is sort of the big spell for this. It's got a fairly decent animation for it, I have to say. Again, you do get that speed debuff. Again, I'm going to go with not particularly useful, as most of the time they're going to be in combat when you do cast this on them. But it is a pretty decent amount of damage that you will do to them. Right, Light Wizard. So, all the usuals for our mounts. Our abilities, our passive here is -4 leadership for undead. So, really only useful, the constant in this case, if you're going to be facing undead. Otherwise, might as well just get rid of it. As for spells, what do they get? Well, personally, I like the Lure of Light. It's certainly one of my favorites. So you get Far's Protection, which is melee defense and armor. So you can just make your troops last a hell of a lot longer in combat. This is particularly useful to have a unit you want to just stick around. They don't necessarily need to be doing a lot of damage. You just want them to stick around and lock down an enemy unit. Right, Shem's Burning Glaze. So I've talked about the magic missiles. This is just another one of them. And yeah, like all of them, it's become less useful than it was originally. Light of Battle, Unbreakable. So this is good if you see a unit flagging. Now, don't bother trying to cast it on them once they've already broken. It's a waste, but certainly if you see them start to waver and you're like, I really can't afford to have them break and run right now, throw this on them and they'll stick around for another 25 seconds at least. Right, Net of Amontok. So this is probably the most loved spell out of this entire list, possibly for use in the Empire in general, besides maybe the healing spells that you get with the Jade Wizard. So, yeah, like it says, that's 16 seconds, and that's without Overcast. Overcast, it becomes even longer. And everything within that 30-meter radius cannot move. That's a long time to keep units in place. This allows you to just shoot at them with impunity, or get your charges off on them. Or both. Shoot at them for most of the duration, then as it's coming towards the end of the duration, send your units in, charge them in. It is just very good. It can also stop enemy charges in your flanks. It is just probably one of the most versatile and useful spells going around. Banishment suffers the same problem as all vortexes that move. It just probably isn't going to stay on the enemy long enough to be useful. Baroni's Time Warp. Yeah, the 24% speed may be useful, but certainly that plus 34 melee attack is very useful. You are going to be hitting the enemy way more often, which is just going to up your damage output. Okay, Celestial Wizard. Look, they may not be the most useful, but I do enjoy Celestial Wizards as they're probably some of the most flashy. So all the usual mounts: Warhorse, Barded Warhorse, and Imperial Pegasus. Abilities. So again, only really useful if you know you're going to be facing a lot of flying. Mostly in terms of the armies that are currently available anyhow, that's mostly going to be Bretonia and Undead are likely to bring the most flying against you. But yeah, whether you feel it's really worth it for -8 to their melee defense and -6 to their missile parry with shields, that second one in particular is only useful against Bretonians. Right, and of course Arcane Conduit. Right, as for the spells, we get Harmonic Convergence, so plus 36 melee defense and plus 34 melee attack. I mean, you just can't argue with that. That is an awesome boost. Wind Blast, so this is a breath spell. It's a teardrop essentially, or a cone, probably better way to describe it. Effect, I know it says teardrop, but I'd really say it affects more like a cone. Yeah, we'll just tear through where you place it. So you get 80 meters and then you get the extension of the actual teardrop shape. You'll see it appear on the ground when you go to cast it. You really want to try and hit bunched up units with breath spells. They don't necessarily do a lot of damage, but that magical damage can be useful against certain unit types. The disrupt unit formation, there's always argument as to how useful that actually is. Alright, Curse of the Midnight Wind. So this lovely hex, -34 melee attack, -30 armor. I mean, you pair this up with Harmonic Convergence and you've essentially just gone, well, I'm going to put out a lot more damage while taking less damage. Also, I'm going to take even less damage because I'm going to lower your melee attack, and you're going to take even more damage because I'm going to lower your armor. Like, in combo, you can really turn the tide of battle with those two. Right, Uranon's Thunderbolt. Looks awesome. Isn't a bad bombardment. Does have that small strike area. Again, not necessarily the most damaging. In saying that, it says it's good against artillery pieces. Because of that range, I haven't always got to try it on artillery pieces, to tell you the truth. But hey, it does look cool. Comet of Cassandora. Yeah. Probably the biggest bombardment spell in the game. Looks awesome. Can actually do quite a significant amount of damage too. Right, and then Chain Lightning. So, yeah, all the usual problems of the Moving Vortex spells. Does look awesome though. Right. And finally, our Bright Wizard. So, all the usual mount choices. Kindle Flame. So, this is one probably worth keeping as it does provide a 12% weakness to fire damage. So, it just really helps amplify most of his spells. Which are Fireball. Suffers more or less the same problem as all your magic missiles. In saying that, because of the fire damage, it can be worth taking against, say, the undead to try and hit mortis engines with. But yeah, they're a fairly big target, so it does miss them a little bit less than some of the other big targets that you're really meant to use these magic missiles against. But yeah, leave that one up to your personal choice. Cascading Fire Cloak. So 18% armor piercing damage and 36 melee defense are both quite good, especially for only 4 winds of magic. Flaming Sword of Rune. So this means you will now do both magic damage and fire damage. Both are useful in their own right, depending on what you're fighting. As well as a nice 22% weapon damage and 22% missile damage. So this means you can use it on either your ranged units or your close combat, or given it's got a 40 meter effect range, potentially both. Burning Head. Yep, so now while it does suffer the same problem as all moving vortexes, it does have the nice little extra bonus of the burnt, which does mean they do get that -8 leadership for 10 seconds. So there is some argument that that can make it worth it, because even if they don't take a lot of damage, that leadership debuff can be worth it. But for 11 winds of magic, I just feel you got better ways of spending it. Flame Storm, so another moving vortex spell. We do get 2 for Law of Fire. Yeah, all the usual problems of a moving vortex spell. Right, Piercing Bolts of Burning. So again, because it comes with that magical and fire damage, it can make it more useful than other bombardment spells. Fairly significant price in terms of its winds of magic, but can do quite a lot of damage. Right, so that's it. We have got through all the lords and heroes for the Empire, which admittedly does have one of the bigger rosters for those. So there it is. I'll do another video in which I'll go through all of the actual troops, as well as obviously doing more videos covering the other races. I hope you can join us for those, and until then, have a good time.